We are recording. Thank you everyone for coming. And on behalf of AECT and particularly the Graduate Student Association, GSA, part of AECT, welcome. We're really glad that all of you are here today. We have a great group of panelists, some very accomplished academics, and we're eager to hear from them, their wisdom, their tips and tricks on how to become an effective and efficient academic writer. Just a note for the setup here with Zoom webinars. The panelists cannot see or hear the rest of our participants. We know you're there. We do have the chat that's going and someone monitoring the chat for us. And at the end, we'll have question and answer time. And so as you go, feel free to type questions into the chat and we'll get to that at the end. We'll make sure we have time for that. I was going to say, join me in welcoming our panelists, even though we can't see you. Just send out good thoughts for Dr. Carr-Chellman, joining us from the University of Idaho, Dr. Jeffrey Carpenter from Elon University, Dr. Tian from Old Dominion University, and Dr. Tyler Hollett from Penn State University. And I'm your moderator. I'm a PhD candidate at Michigan State University. And it's a pleasure to be able to pull everyone together and to have this conversation. So again, thank you all for joining us. Special thanks to our panelists for sharing their wisdom. And with that, I think we're going to just dive in. And so the way this is going to work, we have some questions that are sent to the panelists ahead of time. I'll ask those questions, and then the panelists can kind of take turns. There's no certain order, but just as thoughts occur to you, feel free to jump in. And then if it seems like there's more to mine from our conversation, I'll ask some follow-up questions and try and navigate discussion that way. So without further ado, wanted to go ahead and get started. So first question, scheduling writing time. And the order of these questions is totally my fault. So if things seem out of order, that's on me. But I wanted to start with particularly scheduling writing time, because I've heard different academics talk about how difficult it can be to make sure that you have time to write. And I feel like I've heard a variety of different pieces of advice over the years about how to best make sure you make time to write. So with that, panelists, what's your advice? What would you tell us? How do you make sure you have time to write, and how do you preserve that?
I'll go first. So first of all, thanks for the opportunity to be on the panel, Bret and Pauline. So a couple things that I do to make sure that I have time to write is before the semester even begins, I try and identify a day per week at least that's my writing day, and I put that on my calendar. And so I just have a day where I start off that everything's blocked out. So obviously it's a day where I'm not teaching. And then I try to avoid taking any meetings on those days. And I use it as an excuse to tell people no, because it's hard to say no sometimes. And so it's easier to say no when you have something already on your calendar. And then I also try and find smaller blocks of time throughout the semester where I just put something on my calendar just as writing. So I don't necessarily know what I'm going to be writing, but I know I'm going to be writing. And again, it helps me to say no to people. I love teaching, and teaching is the #1 reason I'm in the job I'm in, but teaching is also a black hole in terms of time. There's always something more you could be doing with your teaching. And committees are not why I got into the job that I'm in, but there's always more committee work to be done. And so, yeah, if you don't sort of block out time, those other things will absorb all of your time. And one of the things, and one other piece, and then I'll be quiet, is for me to do some kinds of writing, I need larger blocks of time, but I need to be writing some almost every day. So on days where I can't get the big block of time to think about writing a discussion or a lit review or something bigger, I will just find some smaller writing task so that I'm always doing a little something, because you can't get in a pattern where you just don't touch your writing for weeks on end. So even if it's just like, okay, I'm going to go check APA format on my references on that article, or I'm just going to go start the cover letter on that article, because you might just have 30 minutes and you can't imagine a bigger task, but you could take on a smaller task and it keeps you engaged with your work.
Thanks, Jeff.
I can chime in. Well, first, thanks Bret and Pauline for this opportunity as well, and I'm really pleased to be here. In terms of the schedule, I feel like it's pretty much not a one-size-fits-all technique for everybody, because I try different things in different semesters. I try like block out one day of the week in probably like about a year ago. I tried that, but this past year I really couldn't do that because there's so many like administrative tasks that that have to be involved in. So this past year I felt like there really wasn't a chance for me to block out a chunk of time to be able to like fully engage in writing. So I kind of changed my philosophy from this kind of work-life balance to a work-life integration. So I try to really find like small chunks of time during your life, just your day-to-day life, and find those like 20 minutes, 30 minutes to really just, as Jeff was saying, just at least we engage in that writing process. It doesn't mean that you have to sit down and write like 2 lines or 4 lines of text. It could mean that you're reading you're reading and taking notes and help that brainstorming of your writing, or it could mean that checking the reference or just doing some kind of editing. So it just really any part that can touch on that project, that research project. I would just have to make sure that I have to engage in that kind of activity, kind of on a day-to-day, on a daily basis.
Thanks. That's great.
I can jump in and just follow up. I feel like I'm a mixture of both of those perspectives. I do try to maintain at least one day to write. So like this semester, as Dr. Carpenter alluded to, like Thursday is the day in which I pretty much say no to anything. I just want to have a large chunk of time. But at the same time, I really recognize that sometimes it's like writing in between the cracks of meetings, of teaching, all of that. And I think especially, I'm a relatively new father. I have a 2-year-old daughter named Lillian, who wakes up at about 6:45 each day. And I've learned that before she wakes up is my time to write. And so that actually has shifted like my entire life schedule in a lot of ways. I go to bed earlier than I used to. I try to relax at the end of the day in order to prepare to go to sleep and get a good night's sleep in order to wake up relatively early. And so the ideal time would be I wake up at 5:45, I get some coffee, and from about 6 to 6:45, I'm at my clearest thinking. I'm at my most excited to write and to think about what I'm writing about. And then I start to hope by about 6:30 that maybe she's actually going to sleep a little bit longer. But at 6:45, when she wakes up, I'm excited to go and be with her. And I feel like I've started off my day incredibly productively, and I've gotten some good writing. And it's enabled me to do that every single day to some extent as well.
Very good.
So hi, it's Allie here. Good to see you, Ty, in particular. I know you.
Yeah.
But thank you to everybody who organized this and to all the other panelists for being here today. It's nice to join you. So actually today is my deep work day. So I call it a deep work day. That's the other thing. But I would kind of echo what Jeffrey is saying here. I think that it's a really useful thing to have one day a week that you try to protect as much as possible. I'd say about 4 times out of 5, it is protected by my staff as a deep work day, and it is a whole day. But then things like this come up, and I'm often finding myself more and more on Zoom meetings of various sorts during that deep work day, which is kind of eating away a little bit. But I think, as an administrator, it's really very difficult to carve out the time to do the writing and the teaching. I'm insistent that continue to be a part of my portfolio. So the folks who evaluate me don't particularly care whether I do teaching and research at all, as long as it doesn't, they're okay with it, as long as it doesn't get in the way of the things that they have on my agenda that they want me to get done. So you hear a lot about administrators who just don't do any more writing and teaching, and I understand why that is, because in a lot of ways there's not a ton of motivation to be an effective or efficient academic writer once you become an academic leader. But from my perspective, it's an essential skill. First of all, any search firm that you talk to about jobs in the academic leadership realm, they will tell you the writing always matters. It always matters. And so you really can't just walk away from that unless you intend to stay at the institution where you are forever, which many of us do. I happen to love Idaho. It's a beautiful place here. So, but for some folks, you know, who want to maintain their marketability, it becomes very important to maintain that, even in the face of not a lot of motivation from the upper administration to do that. So it's as an administrator, it becomes harder and harder to teach and to write. But from my perspective, it's what I call leading from the front. I really like White Christmas. If you've never seen it, go watch it. And there's a wonderful moment there where they're talking about this guy who was a military leader, and they say, we ate, then he ate. We slept, then he slept. And then when he got up, nobody slept for 48 hours. And you can't expect people to respond from a leadership perspective, you can't expect people to respond to you and go above and beyond what you ask them to do and really be heroic in their jobs, unless you are also holding yourself to the same standards. So as an administrator, I think it's really important that we continue to write and to teach and to carve out that time somehow or another.
Thank you, each panelist. Maybe I'll pause and see if there's a follow-up, any ideas that got sparked by listening to the other panelists. Maybe I'll just pause for a moment. It's okay if not. Okay, well, we'll keep moving, and we can always circle back. But maybe a special thanks to Dr. Carr-Chellman for joining us on your Deep Work Day. I love that term. I wrote it down as you were talking. Yeah, the Deep Work Day. Thank you for interrupting for us. I really appreciate it. All right, second, and this is particularly an important point for, I would say, graduate students, but I'd be curious to hear, as each of our panelists is kind of progressing through their career, I'd be curious if the writing opportunities feel like they accumulate or come in seasons, but I'd love to hear some advice just on how do you capture a core focus upon which to build a paper. Yeah, and maybe you could talk about the order in which you generate ideas, building off earlier work, but generally just talk about writing opportunities and how you think about diving into the writing opportunities that you're pursuing.
Am I frozen, or is no one talking?
No one's talking, but Jeff, I was about to call on you. Jeff and I have done some co-writing, and I know that he has more ideas than he's able to write about. So I'm curious, Dr. Carpenter, how you would respond to this, because I know you have.
Okay, I will just say that I'm not going first on all the questions.
Fair enough.
To me, reading and writing are very integrated. And so I don't necessarily think of sort of writing ideas as and opportunities as coming out of the blue. They usually are spurred by I'm reading something for one project, and then it gets me thinking about a possible offshoot project. So, if you want writing opportunities, be reading. And then another piece of advice in terms of writing opportunities is be talking to other people in your field. So, sometimes we get ideas on our own, but I'm a big believer in social constructivism, and a lot of good ideas get created because of conversations we're having with other people. I'm also, I'll just chime in and say that I have never had a very coherent and focused research agenda. I'm a bit all over the place, and I know sometimes doctoral students are there's a lot of emphasis on you have to have this one focused agenda, and you probably do to get your dissertation out. Need to have some degree of focus, but once you finish your dissertation and are out in the profession, I mean, I'm of the opinion that having multiple foci is okay.
So I think I have a pretty broad research agenda. I mean, now I've got a lot of years behind me. I won't say how many, but plenty. And I think what really worked well for me, and it might not work for everybody, but what really worked well for me was finding an overarching construct under which I could place a lot of my work, even though it may have taken place in very different contexts. So I did research that happened in prisons. I did research with homeless. I did research in public schools, obviously, corporations, with military, just kind of in lots of different places, and also about a lot of different things, about performance technologist preparation, about instructional design as a field, about gaming and boys, about online learning, about diffusion of innovations. And so that may feel like, the way I'm describing it, a lot of disparate pieces that don't necessarily hang together. But when I overlay the construct of systems theory on that, it works really nicely. So part of it, from my perspective, is identifying this overarching theme, whether it's something like agency or, as I'm saying, systemic change or entrepreneurship, things like that are really large constructs that can be used, under which you can hang all of the various projects that you've been involved in. And creating a graphic like that can be very useful for your vita, for your promotion and tenure materials, to try to explain to people, no, this is actually a research trajectory. From my perspective, all these things hang together, and here's how they hang together. So, so for me, I have to find some kind of link to that very general and broad area, and within that, I think some of the best research comes from some of the strangest places. So Ty is well positioned to come up with a bunch of new and interesting things because his child is about to start school. And actually, a lot of the stuff that I did around gaming and boys and gender relationship with technology and schools was really born of my experiences watching my own children go through the experience of traditional public education. And I know a number of scholars whose work has been inspired by watching their children, watching their spouses, being involved in something meaningful themselves that sparked something for them that created a whole research trajectory, a whole strand of research that was really pretty interesting and very passionately approached because there's some tie to your real life. And so much as we say, when you're selecting a dissertation topic, don't choose something that someone else has chosen for you that you don't really care about, because you will hate that by the end, and you'll have no interest in creating additional publications when you're done with the dissertation, because you'll just have gotten through it. And where you really want to be as a scholar is on the precipice of a whole bunch of papers that relate to what you did for your dissertation. So you should do a dissertation on something you care about while not trying to save the world in your dissertation project. So that's a kind of delicate balance, right? But I think in the same way, we need to look around ourselves at our world and figure out what motivates us, what's really meaningful, and what do we want our work to be about in the long run. I think that that's part of the effectiveness of being an academic writer.
I absolutely just follow on to that. And Ali sort of invoked my daughter, and I will actually speak to that again. And part of that is it's so deeply important for me because my relationship with her and as a father is so inextricable in some ways from my academic identity as well. And truthfully, Ali, I was visiting a preschool for the very first time today because she's getting ready to go to preschool, and I couldn't turn off some of the things I was thinking about, even if I think my wife,
that's how it works.
my wife would like that. So, but absolutely, I agree with this idea that there's sort of core ideas. For me, it's sort of core theoretical constructs or orientations that guide my thinking. And so even today, as I was at the preschool, I couldn't turn off the idea that this is a really interesting social space that gets produced in really incredible ways. And so spatiality, issues related to space and time are what guide a lot of my thinking. And so I was seeing it there. And that's to say that passion is also there because it's so deeply connected to my family. So that's one thing. And I would say, just as I'm looking at the slide here of thinking about what tends to start some of this research for me, it's definitely those theoretical constructs. It's that passion. It's something that I'm like, man, I really want to write about this. Like, I'm really excited to dive into it. And for me, a lot of that begins with the kinds of data that I collect. So I tend to collect a lot of video data. I do pretty deep ethnographic research. And the question that I ask myself is, a lot of times, is what's weird? Something oftentimes just seems weird and it's sticking out to me, and I want to think more about it. I want to see it. I want to see if it happens repeatedly, and then I want to find those moments of weirdness over and over, and want to play that weirdness out against some of the theory that I'm reading. And so, to echo Dr. Carpenter, reading and writing are so intimately connected. It doesn't begin in a vacuum by any means. It's as Russian theorist Bakhtin would say, it's incredibly dialogic. And so you are always communicating with other theorists, with the other people you're speaking with, whether they're students or professors. And that reading is going to help generate some of that, the ways that you're seeing that data too, and help you begin that writing process.
I would also just add that I think we're all really strong believers of social constructivism. So really getting ourselves engaged in the social platforms like Twitter and Facebook, and I know a lot of us already do, and really getting ideas from those people and getting involved in the conversations with others. Those opportunities always spark some really good ideas for conducting research.
Wow. Thank each of you. To me, this was a really fascinating question, and to hear your responses, I was jotting down notes as you were going through, and yeah, I mean, we hit some really key things. So I want to pause. I think this has been really rich, and I'm okay spending a few extra minutes here if there's more that's been brought up as you've listened to each other. This has been great for me, but yeah, just anything else anybody wants to add.
Hi, Bret. I just want to point it out. The slide has been staying on the first slide, so it has not moved.
Really? So when I'm moving it right now, it doesn't look like it's moving?
Correct.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay. I'm not totally sure how to fix that. Can you see it now?
I can see your mouse moving around, but it's still on the first slide.
The slide is still the same. Okay. I'm not sure how to immediately fix that, so I think we might try and forge ahead. So apologies, everyone. Yeah, it appears to be working on my screen, so apologies to everybody else.
We also have one question in the Q&A about finding journals, but I believe it's also in our question list later on.
We will get there in just a few more slides. Okay. But I will pause. Anything else to say about this generating writing opportunities? Again, we've hit the conversation that happens between reading and writing, social constructivism. We talked about systems theory. I love that question of what's weird in what we're seeing. Anything to respond to each other?
I mean, I think one thing to generate writing opportunities is to talk to people at conferences and propose writing partnerships. So I didn't do that the first few conferences I went to because I was afraid of people or thought that, people would think I was weird or tell me no. And it's okay if they tell you no, no harm in trying. And so I think using conferences to try and begin conversations that might turn into writing opportunities is something that I would recommend.
Yeah, I'll add something here. Ty, do you guys at Penn State still have the research apprenticeship model going?
We do, yes.
Okay. So I would advocate for this strongly, and especially for those who are leaving one university and going to a new university where they might have some impact on creating something new or different. At Penn State, when I was there, we piloted, and it was really as a response to an external review of our program. Ty might not even know the history on this, but there was an external review that came along and And the guy said, you know, what I'm hearing from your students is that you're doing a lot of writing and a lot of research, but they don't necessarily have access to it. You have decided to write with the people that write really well and who are super easy to work with. You, as faculty, don't make those opportunities available universally to everyone. And that's not a good thing with your program. That's something that you can improve. So we took that very seriously and created what we call the Research Apprenticeship Program. We're spreading it out here in Idaho, by the way, and it's been really interesting to see how that's going out here. It's a little different iteration of what we did at Penn State, but essentially that process was one in which you meet with a group of students and you give them access to your writing agenda. In some cases, access to grant dollars when you have them, but also, you know, the opportunity to write with you about various different ideas. And I would come into that research apprenticeship class every week, and we would sit around and talk. We would talk about ideas. We would talk about different things that people were coming up with. And through that sort of pressure cooker of a classroom session, it was almost like a board meeting. People would come in and give reports on what they were doing and what progress we were making on various publications, and which journals we were publishing in, and if that journal didn't work, how about this journal? We would share the experience of what does it feel like when you get a rejection and all that kind of experience. It was super helpful, but it also was really good for my writing agenda, I think, because I was supervising all of that, and I tagged along on a lot of those publications as a last author. So I think that the research apprenticeship model actually works really well. I'll let Ty speak to that as well, because it may be a different experience for him, but for me, working with students in this very open way and opening myself to working with all students, not just the ones that I thought would be easy to work with or would write really well, that produced great outcomes in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, for us especially, it continues to be a really productive way, not only to give writing opportunities to students, but to let them lead and sort of conceptualize ideas on their own too, and to support and nurture that on a regular basis. That's been sort of has like a set meeting time for students too. And so absolutely, it's a model that I've found to be incredibly helpful, both for me to develop ideas, but then to develop them alongside my students from diverse backgrounds on a regular basis as well.
All right, I think I will move us to the next question. And again, we can circle back to some of these ideas if need be. So the third question, and again, apologies if you're unable to see the slide move, but our third question is about organizing your writing. So this could start with, how do you typically get started in the writing process? This could flow out of the writing days or the writing blocks that our panelists have talked about. But as you think about moving through a paper, is it a linear thing? Do you find writing certain sections first? You could even talk about particular tools that you find useful as you engage in the writing process. But yeah, just talk to us generally about organizing your writing and how you move through the process.
I can start us off so Jeff doesn't have to necessarily.
Thank you.
So, and I'll speak specifically about a tool. My student, Nate Turcotte, said that I should talk about this because it's something that I use frequently. So I write with Scribner, Scrivener, and it is a fantastic writing tool. It allows you to organize your writing in really powerful ways. I would actually just suggest people take a look at it and kind of browse through it. I probably won't be able to do justice to some of the nuances in just speaking about it, but I think oftentimes if we're writing in like Word or something like that, we've got like one document. If it's 37 pages, we're like going back from our intro on page 3 to a discussion on page 35. You're moving back and forth all the time. Scribner allows you to really separate out all of those different sections. So I'll have an intro section, I'll have my lit review section, methods, etc. And I can quickly move through all those and see them really seamlessly. It also allows me just to load up all the PDFs, for instance, that I'm using. And then I can put it in split screen, which is like 2 vertical panels. I can have my writing on one side, the PDFs I'm working with on the other side. And so it sort of corrals everything in a really nice way that seamlessly lets me bounce around throughout the paper, as opposed to like linearly trying to sort of progress page by page.
I would say that writing is definitely not a linear process. I found myself always going back to the beginning, like go out to search more articles and then do some of the, sometimes you have to collect some more data. So it's definitely an iterative process, and I always said that to my own doctoral students. And I think when you write, I think the most challenging aspect is, to me personally, sometimes it's really about procrastination. And I think just over the years, I developed some good strategies to counter that. One of them is I always have some kind of timer, some kind of time tracker on my screen, or it could be a browser add-on, like a Google Chrome add-on extension, or it could be just an app on your desktop. So whatever that time tracker is, I will definitely make sure that I keep it on, so that I know that at least for this 20 or 30 minutes or an hour, whatever that time is, I want to make sure that I'm really concentrating on this writing. So the time tracker really helped me. The one that I use almost all the time is called Toggle. It's TOGGL. And the other thing with tools is like I also like to use this tool that's called Momentum, because sometimes I feel like it's when you're writing, you're just really lacking that kind of motivation that keeps you going. That's kind of one of the main reasons why you're procrastinating sometimes with writing. So the Momentum, it's just very simple Google extension, Chrome extension, and what it does is that it just opens up a page, and then it usually with a really really beautiful background image, and then it will give you a sentence that's like really makes your day pretty much. Because like today I'm looking at it, it's a very famous quote, and today the quote is don't let a bad day make you feel like you have a bad life. So it's just quotes like that can really enlighten you and really motivate you. So I really like this Momentum. It's in the Google Chrome, and that's one of the tools that helps me a lot.
So as long as we're talking tools, I'll go ahead and add. I moved so that I could show you this this particular little device, which I think is actually pretty useful. This is called Euler. It's not a cheap choice, I will say, because I think that there's like a monthly fee and so forth. And there's a little base that this thing sits in, so that normally it's sitting essentially upright like this, sort of like a diamond kind of shaped thing. And each one of these has, like, here's Dean admin, and then I have a place for development because I do a lot of development. Here's a space for meetings and for email. And then on the opposite side, I actually have a number of projects that I'm doing, like consulting kinds of projects, which has become really important to track how many minutes essentially you're spending on any kind of project like that. And I have writing as one of my things, and then paperwork and phone calls. And you can customize it, so you can put on there whatever you want. And essentially when you put the thing down on a table, then whatever is up on the top is what's being measured on your computer at that moment. And it's got a whole application, and it tracks every minute that you're spending on various things. I find it to be pretty useful. It's not perfect, but I prefer it because I don't have to go out and do something separate on my computer. I just reach over and grab this thing and say, okay, now I'm working on development. And so I just turn that up on my table or desk. So it does have to go back and forth with you wherever you're going. But I find it to be a pretty interesting little tool, and it's worked pretty well. Now for me, I think the writing process is more like, it is a little more linear, I think. It is iterative for sure, but I think that I sort of describe it as just having kind of diarrhea of the hands or something, right? It's just like because there's a lot of passion about whatever it is. So it's just sort of like it all comes out. Like if I get myself a couple of hours and I know that I'm going to be working on a particular project, I get really excited, and I just start writing, and I just get a lot out there all at once. And then I start going back and figuring out, well, what goes where and what am I missing, and what literature do I need to go back and consult again, and things like that. So like the two pieces that this year that have come forward for me, one is on the use of educational experts in mass media. And I feel really passionate about this. I feel like we need to have more public intellectuals from the education sphere. And if you go and you look at how mass media covers education, tends to be that they don't really care about, they've got people who are mostly not experts in education. And so that has been something that, and it was really easy for me to sit down and scope out what that project was going to look like. And then I collected a bunch of data, looked at a bunch of mass media outlets, looked at the DeVos hearings as an example of this question, and turned it into this kind of very interesting data-driven research project. But it was all kind of from this place of passion, and the first piece of it came out almost as a draft before I even collected any data. I wanted to, kind of scope out the project pretty clearly. And so for me, that's kind of, I would say it's not really linear, but it's maybe more linear, and it's okay to go that way if that's how you operate.
That's great.
I can just add on in terms of like tracking. And I think it's really easy to talk about time in terms of tracking. And I think tools also help us track the time that we're writing. And I know we've talked about like blocking out specific amounts of time to write. And I guess this is another plugin for Scribner that helps shift that idea of tracking a bit. I really like that I can set up how many words I want to write per day within Scribner. And it's going to give me a little bar on the bottom that goes from like red to yellow to green as I write those words. And especially as I was writing my dissertation, when I felt like I had a lot of time to write, I wasn't pulled in as many directions by committee meetings or teaching or even family time as well. And so I would set up and say, I want to write 500 words a day. And I would stick to that. And sometimes I would hit that goal at 4:30 or 5:30 in the afternoon. And sometimes I'd hit it by 10 a.m. And on those days that I hit at 10 a.m., I was done. And I hit that goal. And so I think that's another way of sort of tracking that progress and not just like feeling sort of defeated, like if you didn't get a lot of writing done in a specific day, but to sort of force yourself to hit that point, whether it is early in the morning or later. And sometimes the way I hit that 500 words was, maybe I dropped in a 100-word quote that I was citing. And I was kind of building from that. And that counts just as much. That is just as generative for your writing as well. And so that's just an alternative perspective to look at tracking too.
So I do not particularly write in a linear fashion. What I write sometimes depends simply on how much time I have. So as I mentioned earlier, like I need a bigger chunk of time if I'm going to tackle a discussion section or an intro. And sometimes I don't have that big chunk of time, but I want to be productive. And so I'm just like, okay, I'm just going to write, one part of the method section that's fairly straightforward or something like that. And in order to do that, I would just say, I would recommend, always trying to have more than one project going. So I realize if you're a grad student, you probably have a main project, which should be your dissertation. But if you're going to be an academic, you're going to have to learn how to manage more than one project. So have another project at some stage of gestation so that, there are days where just cognitively I'm not there. Maybe I have the block of time, but I just feel like I can't right now wrap my brain around tackling that certain part of this project. But I'm in a number crunching mood. I feel like I could crunch the numbers. So I'll go on this other project where I haven't described the sample yet. And so I'll just, go through and I'll describe the sample and I'll feel productive and I'll have moved a project along.
So yeah, I like to talk about, especially when I was teaching that research apprenticeship course, I like to talk about a 6-burner stove. So you've got pretty much 6 is as many as I've been able to handle at any one given time, 6 different projects. Some people are better at this than others. So some people have 10-burner stoves and some people have 4-burner stoves. But I agree with Dr. Carpenter that you should have them in various stages. And so I talk about some of them are boiling and some of them are simmering. And I also say, sometimes you have minute rice, right? This is something that's very short, very quick. Maybe it's a theoretical piece, maybe it's a conceptual piece or a practice-based piece for an online space or something like that. And those are okay too. It's nice to have a good balance on your portfolio of different ways that you've reached out to the disciplinary community. And so the notion of having multiple projects all at once, I agree with Dr. Carpenter on that for sure.
This is great. Again, really, really rich discussion. Appreciate the metaphors that we're getting, the tools. I've been jotting down notes myself. So thank you. We have 2 more questions scheduled, and I do want to leave some time for Q&A at the end, knowing that we have we do need to cut off at the top of the hour. I think these next 2 questions can be faster, and maybe not everyone needs to answer if you feel like things have been adequate. I purposely front-loaded the really rich and meaty questions at the beginning. So I think these are a little bit more procedural. So the 4th question is just dealing with authorship. I think for grad students, oftentimes it can feel intimidating to think through, how do I have that discussion of authorship order? Where do I fall? What does it mean to be first author versus third author or fourth author? So if you have thoughts, just kind of broadly about authorship, but particularly about how to have some of these conversations with co-authors, that would be fantastic. Thanks.
Sure, I guess I can grab that one for a minute anyway. I've done a lot of different models, and early in my career, I had a guy by the name of Philippe Duchatel, who was a fantastic guy that I had worked with at McDonnell Douglas when I was working on jet fighter pilot training stuff. He had moved on to Nova Southeastern at that point, or Nova, whatever it's called, and he was doing online stuff. And we created an article that is like still among one of the most cited things I've ever done, and frankly not my favorite piece, but on the ideal online class. And we did it together. But he really was the impetus, but he wanted to be second author, and he said, I don't need this. So I think that there's this important balance that has to be struck between, as a community, we take care of each other, right? As a full professor, it's now my opportunity to give back, to find graduate students and faculty who are not yet tenured, who might want to work with me and write with me and let me be second or third author. I'm now at this point, I pretty much universally, unless it's something that I'm writing on my own, I universally take second or third fiddle on it. I think that's an important part of our obligation to one another as scholars, while not wanting to undermine the basic tenets that if someone writes something, it's their work. And so, if I've written the entire thing, I'm not going to put somebody else's name first. It needs to be something that was pretty collaborative. And those are hard conversations to have. I encourage everyone to have those as early as you possibly can. It may feel a little uncomfortable, but there's some really good books out there that can help guide you through these kinds of conversations. There's one called Crucial Conversations and one called Difficult Conversations. Both of them are worth looking at because they have very strategic and tactical ways of having difficult and crucial conversations that you may be anxious about. But in general, I think if someone has written the first draft, then if they've really written it, then they should be the first author on it, and that's sort of how it should be. I think it's the part that's difficult is when it gets messier. So somebody writes the first draft and it's just a failure, and you have to rewrite the entire thing, and then you say, "Gosh, did I really write that? Did the other person really write that?" That's where it starts to get messy, and you have to have some of those difficult conversations. So I do recommend reading up a little bit on how to have difficult conversations, because I think that that's a really good skill set to have in any case, in lots of places in your life, but in particular in this kind of thing.
Yeah, thank you.
I would also just add that sometimes we also need to take into consideration of the nature of the project. So if it's a student in a faculty project, and if it's for a student dissertation or students their own research project, then the conversation is between the student and the faculty member. And usually, of course, the student, if it's the student leading the project, writing the first draft and doing all the data collection and analysis and all that, of course, the student is the first author. But there will be cases where you have to flip the table. Like if when the data comes out and the first draft, it's not gonna, or maybe after several attempts, then it didn't make it into a journal article. Then the faculty member, or sometimes it's the student that will initiate the conversation of asking the faculty member could take the first author responsibility and rewrite a large portion of that article. So that kind of, it's like that nature of the project, it's a student and a faculty member type of project. But if it's another type of project, like faculty between colleagues, then sometimes it's slightly different. And then sometimes it could be a grant project. If it's like a grant funding project, then you will have to consider those who sometimes probably don't even write a word for this publication, but because they contribute to the grant proposal, and they contribute and help with getting the grant funded. So then in those cases, they're definitely, of course, you want to have those conversations early on, and you don't want to get into a situation where you don't include certain people on the grant in your publication, and later then they found out that their names are not on it and they expect it to be on it. So if you decided that if for a grant project and for certain publications, some people that are on the grant but not the publication, you want to have those conversations with those people and make sure that they are aware of, they're okay with, they're not getting involved in these publications, this article projects, even if they are on the grant. So I think taking into consideration about what type of project it is, and sometimes it could be a project between practitioners, and practitioners sometimes they might not care whether or not they're getting credit. So they're just always like different situations that you want to kind of taking those aspects into account when you're coping with the authorship challenges.
Thank you. For the sake of time, can we move to the last question? All right. Yeah, don't want to cut anybody off, but do want to keep moving. So, okay, so our last question is just about finding the right outlet for your writing. Again, this could be fairly quick, but how do you think about what the right fit is for an article?
I'll start with this one since I haven't become the first. I think there are several ways that you can do that. The first thing I will do is definitely look at the journal metrics, whether it's there are many websites and organizations that provide some metrics that you can reference. So you can look for Web of Science, and you can look for the Cabals is another one that gives you a pretty good acceptance rate. And sometimes it could be going to the specific journal article, the journal website, and look at the impact factor. And also look at those mission and about the journal page, so that you can kind of see if the article that you've written really fit into their scope. So that's kind of help you to find that outlet for that article. Other than that, I'd also think it's really important to look at their past issues, just to get a sense of what type of articles are actually being published in that journal, because sometimes when you look at the mission statement, you're looking at the scope, the description of the scope of the journal. It's a little bit abstract, and you probably do not get a really good sense. But after you read their article and really see, they have a pretty good, like, high expectation with sample size, or they're pretty much very quantitative or research oriented. You don't really see any qualitative or mixed method in this particular journal. And maybe that's probably a hint for you that this might not be a really good outlet for your particular article, if your article is more qualitative. The other strategy that I use is, especially if I'm on a time crunch and I really want to get this article out, and I would just email that journal editor. And most of the time, the journal editors are pretty responsive, even though sometimes it would take them a week or two to respond. But most times the journal editors are pretty responsive to those kind of inquiries. So what I do is I will just copy and paste the abstract. I'm not going to attach any email attachments in that particular email. I'll just do a very quick abstract, 100 or 150 words, embedded in that email, and then just send it out and ask the journal articles feedback, and ask them if they think this would be a good fit for the journal. That's what I would typically do. Another thing that I also tend to talk to my colleagues if I see any, sometimes the journal takes more than 9 months and nothing was, I don't get any feedback from the particular journal, and then I will definitely talk to my colleagues. And also one thing I always encourage my doctoral students to do is that creating some kind of personal spreadsheet to document your own experience with journals. So I have my own spreadsheet where those are all the journals that I personally have experience with, and I want to document like how many days I receive like a first email feedback from the editor, a DEX rejection, or maybe it's just telling you that they received that, and then just kind of tracking that time, and then some of them I may not submit it, but I just send an email inquiry to the editor. So I always have a spreadsheet that I keep track of those journals that I personally have experience with. That definitely helps you to kind of build on your own personal kind of database or your own toolbox, just making sure that you have a good understanding or good documentation of your experience of those journals.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. Anything else to add? Finding the right outlet for your writing?
Yeah, well, I guess I would add that, as I was a graduate student, I started to realize there were certain journals I just really enjoyed reading the articles that were coming out of there. And so for me, that was one place that I knew after I had finished my dissertation, I was like, I want to hit this journal and I want to go there and I want to go there because I love the articles. Like they're fun to read. I look forward to seeing new articles that are released. And I think importantly, that's because that's the community that you want your work to be in conversation with. You want to be speaking, and I think your greatest contribution to that journal is when you're speaking to those who have also published in that journal, that you're advancing the research that's been published in that journal. And I think the journal wants that. They want their work to be not only like in a sort of cynical way, like cited, but they want those conversations to grow and develop and to make progress and change over time too. I think a second thing that, especially sort of in the early years of being an assistant professor, I was curious about turnaround time. And so I think to kind of echo some of what Dr. Lowe was saying was that you can see, date of first submission, date of, I guess, whatever the first revision was put in, maybe a second revision, and date of publication. And if that is a really long time, I'm gonna think a bit more deeply about submitting to that journal. So I've been pretty deliberate about not submitting to specific journals at this stage of my career, and going to places that I feel like are gonna have a quicker turnaround for me, that seem to celebrate quick turnarounds. And then I'll sort of double check that in terms of the journals or the articles that have been published in that journal as well.
That's great.
I guess I would also add that I think, I've got this kind of long view of the field and some of the publications. From my perspective, the shifts in BJet I haven't been real happy with them, to be honest. They are, I think, higher impact now than they were when I first started in the field. But the direction that they're going is, less and less friendly to the kind of work that I do. And at the same time, we've lost Educational Technology Magazine, which was one of the best, in my opinion, for really doing cutting edge work that was theoretical and it wasn't general. There was, for a short period of time, there was a little piece that it was refereed, but in general wasn't refereed. It was edited by this luminary in our field who did this amazing work and got these amazing special issues out there. And still, a lot of that work is some of the best work that we've got in the field, in my opinion. And when Larry passed, the editor, that was the end of that journal, which was, I think, a huge loss for our fields. ETR&D now, they are in the middle of doing a special issue on theory because there was a conversation with scholars at the last AECT saying, really haven't seen a lot of theoretical pieces in ETR&D since the 90s and aughts. And in the last decade or so, we haven't really seen that much theoretical work coming out of ETR&D. So I think, to name a couple of specific journals, they evolve over time. And it's really interesting to observe that and think about that in terms of where you want your work to be in the long term and how you want it to be perceived and what are the right matches. So I echo everything that the other two have already said about this, but I would say that there's less openness maybe to some of the cutting edge theoretical pieces that are in the traditional fields of instructional design, educational technology, things like that. There's a little bit more of that activity over in the learning sciences space, I think, right now.
Well, I think I will open up. I know Pauline has been monitoring the chat in the Q&A box. I just glanced at it and I saw some of our moderators or panelists have also been engaging there. So thank you for back channeling on top of thinking on your feet. Appreciate that. And I'll say we have about 5 minutes until we need to do a hard stop. So this could be a lightning round, but Pauline, do you have anything that feels like this would be a really great addition to the conversation that we've had so far? Anything you want to throw in there?
There's one question here, Bret. I believe it's from Priyanka. She asked, are there any volunteer opportunities for research and writing for people who are not currently enrolled in a PhD program? So I think it's asking about opportunity, writing opportunity and research opportunities for those who are not in the PhD journey.
Yeah, I'll open that to the panelists. It's a great question.
Yeah, I mean, if you're not in school at all, it's a little bit tough to get access. You know, but I've worked with undergraduates and honors programs and things like that, and certainly with master's students as well. And so I think it's not an unreasonable expectation, especially if you're at a research institution, to hope or expect that your faculty will engage you in those, whether you're a master's student, an undergraduate student, or a doctoral student.
Conferences could also be that place maybe where, you know, it doesn't really matter who you are at the conference. If you've got an idea, if you're able to get to a conference, it could be a place to initiate a conversation.
Yeah, good. Any other ideas? Any other thoughts? It's all right. Well, I'm going to wrap us up just so we can be done at the top of the hour. So again, just to say thank you to our panelists, and I know they can't see you, but folks in the audience, you know, give them a clap. Thank you, Dr. Carpenter, Dr. Hollett, Dr. Luo, Dr. Carr-Chellman. We appreciate your time. We know it's the middle of the day. We know you have a lot going on, as evidence is hearing about your writing schedules. This has been rich. I've been jotting down notes the entire time. I think this is well worth going back and watching. So I'd encourage, even though those of you who are here live, I'd encourage you to go back and rewatch this. We're going to try and spread the word through GSA social media outlets, but please help us. I think there's a lot of wisdom that's been captured in just an hour here. So please help us spread the word. We'll have this recording up on YouTube soon. So yeah, be on the lookout for that, and we'll spread the word to all of you who participated and registered. We'll send an email with the link to the YouTube video, but please help spread that. And then just a last opportunity, some other friends in GSA have been organizing these virtual writing sprints, and they've done some proof of concept work in past months. And knowing that we're all headed towards the end of the semester, in the next month or so, every week, every Monday, there's going to be kind of a collaborative, not collaborative, but a co-working space, virtual co-working space to keep working on writing sprints, just to have somebody else that you know is also putting their nose to the keyboard and writing along with you. So if that's of interest, again, follow along, connect with GSA through social media, and we can keep the conversation going. But again, a final thank you to our panelists. Thank you to the audience for joining us live. Thank you to future audiences for checking this out and engaging with us. Really appreciate it. And with that, we'll sign off. Thank you all.